Tanium and ServiceNow have taken the inefficiencies out of vulnerability management. See how all that scanning, reporting, patching, and approving is now completely automated. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. Are you tired of the Patch Tuesday shuffle? Different teams with different tools trying to tell each other what to do and then prove they did it? Well, see how Tanium and ServiceNow have completely changed that dance into a speed dating exercise. That's right. Together, we have eliminated massive inefficiencies in the process of scanning, approving, and patching. Gather your teams around the tube and let's watch this demo today. Because I've got the busiest man at Tanium here to show you how it works. Saqib, please introduce yourself for our viewers.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, my name is Saqib Khan. I'm the field CIO here at Tanium. I'm responsible for our integrations with ServiceNow and our partnership here for the last 3 years. And I'm proud to say that we're very happy to discuss the vulnerability response and compliance lifecycle management, including patch orchestration today. Thank you for having me, Ashley.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Saqib, because I personally have been hearing about this integration for the last year, and I still haven't gotten to see it yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing this today. And I know our viewers are as well because of that Patch Tuesday shuffle. So help us understand, what exactly is the problem that we've solved together with Tanium and ServiceNow?
There's actually a few different challenges that we see customers across all industries struggle with. And that's primarily, if you think about the patch lifecycle of patch management on its own, and I'm starting from at the other end because it's important to understand why people patch in the first place. Patching itself is a program in every company today. And we patch because we need to keep our systems up to date, but we also patch in events of zero-day threats, vulnerabilities that exist in the environment. And from the CISO and CIO perspective, collectively as a one organization, we need to be risk adverse and risk free, resilient to the threats that are out there. And so these solutions are really to address the real-time visibility into your vulnerabilities, but also assess the business risk. And while you're assessing the business risk, be able to meet and exceed your SLA expectations of automated patching based on the requirements.
That's a mouthful, and a lot of C-level conversation there. But where I think it comes down to the people that I work with every day is they say that, I've got all these different teams and tools. One team scans, another one patches, and then they're trying to figure out, okay, wait a minute, you said you did this, and it doesn't look like it was done, and then there's got to be somebody to approve all this stuff. And ServiceNow is a workflow platform, right? That's what it specializes in. What have we built?
So what we built is really the workflows in ServiceNow, all the way from detection as a scanner integration to being able to provide the vulnerability findings with the CMDB assets that we sync over to ServiceNow, relate them together so then you understand what to work on first. So these workflows initially detect and remediate or put into a remediation step-by-step process in ServiceNow through changes. And change management is another workflow that we're embedded in. So as an admin of ServiceNow or a change manager, I would typically create a change by myself, or I would create a change with a group of people, asking them what to put in the change, what the impact would be, what the risk would be of patching something. So what we've done is really automate that process of change management alongside with vulnerability scanning and vulnerability data. So then you know what to patch, how to prioritize it, and then be able to quickly pivot into a change and ensure that once the change is approved, then it auto deploys a patch for you at scale using Tanium.
I'm really curious to understand right up front, what are the requirements on each side as far as licensing? What do I need to have licensed as far as Tanium modules and ServiceNow components to make all this work?
Right now, right off the bat, you need there's two solutions in the market. The first solution is kind of what you're seeing on the screen here, which starts with vulnerability management. Vulnerability management in ServiceNow is called vulnerability response as a licensable product. We would also require Tanium comply to complete the scope for the scanner integration, which is the initial data into ServiceNow for vulnerability findings. And that's the first step, is to get that data into ServiceNow into the right product called vulnerability response. The second part of this is to be able to remediate those vulnerabilities. And so we have this solution called vulnerability response patch orchestration. And patch orchestration in ServiceNow is an add-on plugin to vulnerability response. The other thing you need in Tanium is the Tanium patch product, which allows you to then integrate a life cycle of remediation alongside with the vulnerability findings.
We always use the phrase better together. I just think on the Tanium side, okay, I've got comply as the module that does my vulnerability scanning. And we've had the ability to just kind of pivot from there into patch, but we've missed that workflow component of the change approval as well. So we think about just the life cycle. One team scans usually with their tool. They have to create some kind of list that goes into a change management approval, and then they tell the other team that owns the patching tool to do their thing, and then the other team comes back all the way around to say, okay, let's scan again and make sure we got it. And so Tanium's got a lot of the hooks in there to do that work, but putting this all in one system on the workflow side from ServiceNow, it really, I mean, Tanium is able to do this quickly already, but now with the people and process side of this, it seems like it would just go much faster. I'm curious, what have you heard from customers who are using this, how it's changed their processes?
Well, it's definitely streamlined their processes across different functions. Like I said earlier, you'll have a detection mechanism on what's out there in the first place. The security team would typically work on those initial analysis and then tell the operational teams that, hey, these are the ones that we need to work on first. And this is typically spreadsheets. And what I hear from customers is that Tanium and ServiceNow automate that process for them so they know exactly what to work on without having to dig through spreadsheets or different scanners or different tools. And ServiceNow does a really good job of bringing it together in the context of the business risk, right? So if a server has a vulnerability and it's a Windows server and it keeps your business functioning and operational, that server goes down because you missed out on the patching remediation, then that brings the business down. So there's a level of connecting the dots between the vulnerability of security teams when they review that data to making a decision on prioritizing this server because it keeps your business functioning. And that's the operational teams that own those servers. And then you have the people who patch. And typically that's a broken process because they don't have anything to do with creating a change. They rely on the change. So we bring all of these teams together with ServiceNow and Tanium. And that's what I hear with customers, is that they no longer have to worry about a process. They can now focus on fixing the actual problem. And that's the value that we hear constantly from customers.
I'm really curious. I know this might be a little bit longer episode for our viewers. Saqib, what's the shortest path for us to get this up and going in our environment? Do we have
Yeah.
some documentation to kind of walk us through that? Is this something I can do myself? Do I need somebody from Tanium or ServiceNow to help me do it?
So the great news is that we made these integrations for ServiceNow and vulnerability response with Tanium super easy. The documentation is on the Tanium website. We will share that link on this call, and also the ease of use of the installation guided wizard setup in ServiceNow. That's actually how we do this quickly. The first step is to actually find and install. So by typing in Tanium in the search, the first thing I see is that there's at least 9 different results that come back. Now, it can be pretty confusing because there are two with very similar names. One of them is called vulnerability response integration, and one of them is called vulnerability response patch orchestration. Now, both of them are actually required to enable the entire life cycle end to end. But what we're going to show you first is what you have to enable before you do any sort of remediations. It's the actual data about the vulnerabilities that should be in ServiceNow. So this is the first application. You'll see a get button on the top right hand corner. and you click the get button to have it enabled as an entitlement for your environment. Now it's compatible with pretty much all of the recent releases, and soon it won't be compatible with Tokyo. So please make sure you are on the last 3 releases.
We're waiting on a cloud service to do that for us in the background. How long does it normally take for that to happen?
It really depends on how quick they turn around the entitlement for you, but typically it's less than 5 to 10 minutes of a given. As soon as you click get, you should be able to see it almost within 10 minutes or so in your environment. Once you get the entitlement enabled, and it tells you that this plugin will be enabled in your instance to install, now you have to come into ServiceNow, just like any other plugin that you normally install, type in Tanium, and you will see that there will be a series of products that will be available on this side of the fence, where you're going to see vulnerability response, you're going to see Tanium integrations, etc. And that's where you're going to have to install the vulnerability response Tanium plugin to be able to now get to the setup menu that we're going to go through and show you next. Let's say now you've installed it through this application manager in ServiceNow. The next step is really easy, because what you need to do here is type in Tanium VR, and Tanium VR will become a menu item on the list here in the navigator. As soon as it's installed, you'll see this menu item. You might have to refresh once, but you should see it right away. Once you've installed it and you see this, go to the guided setup. This guided setup is intended for any ServiceNow administrator to be able to configure the basic parameters and configurations to be able to get this integration to be activated. Before we go too far in this, as you can see, the first few steps require us to have the Tanium URL and an API token. And this is kind of, you can't really get started with this until you've configured the Tanium side of the integration as well. Actually, I do have to admit, I think this is the easy part. The longer part of the configuration is on the Tanium side. And there's a reason for that. Tanium is a very good scanner and really solid tool around vulnerability scanning. And it does have a lot of powerful capabilities to filter out, bad data or batch up very large data sets. Some of our customers struggle with 40, 50 million rows in the vulnerability comply module, and they struggle with sending that data outbound to any location. I have to admit, we are one of the few vulnerability scanners that are able to handle 50, 60, 70, 80 million rows through our product alone to be able to send it to ServiceNow. Now, let's walk through a couple of different scenarios in the Tanium side. This is the Tanium console. The first step that we're going to do to set up the integration is we're going to set up a Connect job. For those of you who are learning about Connect for the first time, Connect allows us to send data from Tanium from a source, whether it's a specific product of Tanium or a specific report or question or data, to a destination that could be an email alert or an S3 bucket or HTTP destination. But the way we send the vulnerability data for our solution is through an HTTP destination. Our integration that we installed here also enabled a URL inside of an endpoint, essentially, inside of ServiceNow to be able to post to. And as part of our documentation, you will, as you're walking through the setup, you're going to be able to plug that URL into a connection that we're going to create here. Let's go through and take a look at what ServiceNow VR integration setup looks like in Tanium. We have to make sure of two key things about our Tanium product overall. Before you set this connection up, make sure you have the ability to take a look at all of the findings in the Comply product, because this is the product that we're going to be pulling our data from. And as we look at findings, you may have a lot of vulnerabilities in this product that you may not want to send in the first run. You might have requirements around criticals, highs, mediums, maybe lows, or you might have a requirement around sending everything. But really think through what your stakeholders are going to want to work on first. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to dump everything to ServiceNow and expect it to be perfect. We do need to be mindful of the use cases that you're trying to enable. So as an administrator, I might care about CVSS score, and you have to check this with your security teams and your risk teams, people who are going to use the data in ServiceNow, I might care about CVSS score 5 to 10 or 8 or higher. And I might care about Windows machines and not Linux right now. So really go through the requirements of the ServiceNow vulnerability response requirements and then determine what type of data we need from Tanium. So as you can see, my criticals are now much lower, highs are a little bit high. So now I can actually save this as a report that matters to me. So I'm going to save this as a ServiceNow. This is for our SNVR integration. Once I save this, now I have the data set I need to be able to use in my connection. And this will ensure that I don't send anything but that data set. So 5 to 10 on them. Cool. Now that I have that, and we made sure there's no bad data, there's exactly what I need, I'm going to go back to Connect. Now, inside of Connect, when you create a connection to any ServiceNow instance, make sure in the name we have a ServiceNow dev environment or indication of which environment in the name. It's really important to do that. Otherwise, you'll have many Connect jobs that you really don't know where they're going until you look at the URLs. So this is my dev environment. Immediately, I have an advanced section here. For the first run or first 2 runs, you should keep this log level at a trace level. And that's because we want to see if you run into a problem, let's say a connection problem or a timeout or something, we know exactly what's going on with the right level of either debug or trace statements. Trace might be overkill for some, and debug might be sufficient. So we can start with debug and work our way up to trace if we do not get the right level of logs if something fails. I'm going to do this for 2 runs. So that way we have enough data to adjust anything like timeout issues or whatever else that might come up.
Oh, so okay, temporary. Oh, it's been a while since I looked at Connect. I didn't realize we could do this on a temporary basis. So it'll just do 2 temporary runs at debug level, then after that it goes back to informational.
Yes, actually. So exactly that, right? So it will do the 2 first runs at debug, and then revert back to informational after those 2 runs.
Beautiful, beautiful. I
It's a
like
great
it.
feature actually. That way I don't have to worry about turning it off, which can cause Tanium to actually perform really, really badly if you have trace level logs always enabled. Now we're going to leave the minimum password usage to 0, but what we do really need to consider is the way that Tanium works in the background is that the module server that's responsible for collecting this information from the comply product in the background to bring all the data to then package it up to send it out to ServiceNow, it takes up a lot of memory and takes up a lot of resources. So we want to make sure that this Connect job does not hit a limit that you've set in the Connect job itself. So this memory ceiling height, typically we start with 4. And depending on how large you are as a customer, or your customer is, let's say, 50,000 endpoints, 20,000 endpoints, or anything above 10,000 endpoints, you'd want to make sure you're between 2 and 4 gigabyte of memory ceiling space. Now,
Okay, so when you mouse over the little information there, that's just gigs of memory. Okay.
correct. Yeah. So this is how much the nodes will have to run the process.
Okay.
Because some customers are in 40, 50 million, 60, 80 million rows, this actually goes all the way up to 8 gigs. And that's just the reality of running such a large data sync to an external HTTP destination. So we have to play with this depending on how large you are. 4 is the typical size, and then could go down to 2 if you're under 10,000 endpoints, or if you're over 50, 100 endpoints, 100,000 endpoints, we will go higher than 4, all the way up to 8. But we'll start with 4 and see how it performs. So then we move into very specific configuration around the data itself. This is really important because as we scroll down to the findings report, our source is going to be the Tanium comply findings. And you remember we created that report earlier for ServiceNow. So let's look for ServiceNow. There's my report right there. So that's my filtered report, which is great. I don't want to send anything but that. And I'm going to select the destination to be HTTP, and we'll come back to filling that out. But on the source side, if you look at the advanced settings, this is also very, very important. When we look at the advanced settings on the source side, the most important thing here is the batch size. So this means that we will query for comply data from our comply database at this batch size, right? So we want to make sure we don't fetch too much data at a time, because if we fetch for 5,000 rows at a given time, we will hit a very hard limitation or at least timeouts to the comply product, because there's other things that are querying the database as well. So we want to be respectful of the comply usage as other things are using it. We shortened that down to the pretty much less than half. 2,000 is a perfect sort of size for most customers. So start there and work your way up or work your way down, depending on if you run into any performance issues. And we'll know that as we work through the first thing, the second thing, and fine tune it with you as well.
And because we're going from to a cloud service, I'm guessing this would be the same configuration for on-prem or cloud for your Tanium side.
I think on the source side, if you're an on-premise customer, you have to be a little bit more careful, because your Tanium module server that's responsible for querying this data back to the comply database and bringing and packaging it up, it will start to, like, we have to be a bit more careful on the on-premise side. Cloud is controllable from here, of course, but it's also something that we can scale up and scale down from the Tanium side, right? So you may run into some issues with cloud if you're a very large customer and you have to adjust this. Or for most customers for on-prem and cloud, batch size of 2,000, it's usually pretty optimal. Now, cache sizes are very important too. So you can also hit the maximum cache size in the logs as we're working through the connector. So I usually up it to about 250 megabyte for cache size for very large sinks. So since this isn't a very large sink, we're going to keep it at 100. The batch size definitely should start at 2,000. So that's the source side. This is how we query the comply data, not sending it out yet, right? On the other side, on this specific side, we're going to type in ServiceNow. The good news is that we have all of these URLs already kind of added to our. So this is not the right one, but these are the URLs that are already part of your documentation. You're going to find that there's a couple of things that will pop up, and you already see this popping up right here. So if I go down and I look at this error, if you're in the cloud and you're a cloud customer, there is a cloud management portal that you have access to as an administrator. You have to make sure the host is added to that list. If that host is not on that list, you're not going to be able to send data out from this Connect job. So make sure in the CMP, the cloud management portal, under egress allow list, you add your host for your ServiceNow instance. It's going to be a post call, and it's going to be trust on first use. Headers will stay the same. And you're going to go ahead and create a ServiceNow service account that has a Tanium role that's given to you from the installation, and add it as a basic authentication username password, which is very straightforward. Now, in the future, this will be a token-based authentication. Like the source, you do have to set the batch size here as well. Start with 2,000 and keep the timeout to 10. 2,000 is optimal for most customers. Sometimes you have to go lower or higher depending on how many nodes you have in ServiceNow. And we'll talk about that just in a little bit. And that's how you set up the destination and source. So this will start to make more sense as you work with it. The next part of the setup, which is, I think, equally important, is being able to learn on how much data we send out and how we send it out. In the Tanium capabilities, one of the capabilities in the Connect module, the core thing that you can do is really learn from if something has changed. So if you think about deltas, you don't want to necessarily send millions of rows every single day exactly the same way all the time. You want to be able to have Tanium understand what's actually changed and only send the deltas on those detected changes. So that's where you start to think about what are the most important attributes here to be able to detect changes on given findings. And there is actually a pretty long list, not long, I would say about 7 or 8 different attributes that we depend on. Now you can change this to your way of, whatever you prefer as deltas. Define the delta characteristics for your organization. But what we typically do is we look at computer ID, we look at computer name, and we look at a bunch of other things like serial number, So if any of these things change, of course, we care about those deltas. Why is that changing in the first place? IP address is another important one. And you know, as you look at the CVE itself, the CVE may have a change. So if the CVE stays the same, of course, it might for the most part, then there may not be a reason to send that CVE over. It's exactly the same. Affected platforms and products are also very, very important. Expected states could change because there may be an update to the CVE. You know, how they prove that it's actually a vulnerability on an endpoint. The actual values is what we find in the environment. So at a given time, even though we detected the vulnerability, maybe we haven't found the actual proof of where it exists. So actual values will also be things that we watch for change. And then when first it was found, that could change every day. So make sure that actually meets the requirement, because that would basically mean that if it's first found and it changes every day, or last found, for example, those are two other attributes. And if you use that for learning, then they may change daily, and then you have a full sync every single day. So these are very important things to go over with your team to define what a Delta setup looks like. This is your Delta setup on the right-hand side.
So just a quick recap, if I'm following you. So we went into comply to get a vulnerability list of findings, and those findings are then coming out here in the connect job as the data source. And then because I'm going to be sending this to the destination of ServiceNow, I have to use these attributes. If any of these attributes are different, I know that I've got a new row that needs to be sent. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
These attributes will determine from after the first sync is done, Tanium will start learning. And if any of these attributes have changed on those given records from before, from the first run, then they will be part of the next run. If they haven't changed, then they will not be part of the next run, which actually means that you're going to reduce, let's say, for example, you have 1 million records and only 10% of them have changed in the next run. So you're only going to get 100,000 records in the next run, which will be a lot faster and more efficient and a proper Delta setup. But this is our recommendation on what to monitor for change. You can do it your way, and you can define your Delta setup whatever way you want.
So as I'm thinking about this, I've got multiple findings reports. Do I have to set up one for every operating system, for every operating system version? Kind of back on the comply side, I'm pretty sure I should ask that earlier, but
No, you don't. You could add more filters, but we try to keep it as simple as possible. It's based off of a finding, regardless of operating system or type of computer, etc. Um,
great.
yeah, but you can add more filters if you like. And some people don't use it at all. Some people just keep sending the exact whatever they find every single day, all the time, and that's just because of the audit and compliance requirements. So it just depends on your version of deltas, and if that is sufficient, then great. If it's not, then just send what you need to, and just make sure you monitor for those batch sizes to help you scale to that level as well. So the next section is, again, really important. CSV is the format we want to send it in, and there's a reason for that. In ServiceNow, we actually parse the CSVs into import sets. So for the ServiceNow people, they will understand the importance of making sure we have the right format to be able to parse and insert into the ServiceNow vulnerability response table structure. So make sure it's CSV, and you can keep these two check marks. That's just out of the box. We can leave that there. The big part of this setup, and this is where it gets a little bit more in depth, is that these columns, you're going to have a lot of columns in the column section here. We don't necessarily want to send every single column as part of this thing, because comply as a product has hundreds of columns that it can fill. What we want to send is the most relevant information so you can make a quick determination on where the CVE is, where the finding was found, and what type of IP address, the basic information about the CVE and the basic information about the computer. So what we do is we select things that we only need to care about. We only care about computer ID, computer name. We don't necessarily care about the IP address that we see here, but we care about the client IP address. So you'll see that there's another column here called Tanium client IP address. Tanium client IP address is how we verify that this is the actual agent client IP address that we're seeing. The other column that we care about is, it's at the very top. It's called CVE. Now, this is all listed inside of the documentation. Why I'm showing you this and why this is important is because what we want to send out from this connect job is going to be minimal requirements for us to create the vulnerable item in ServiceNow as a record. But we're also going to be able to pull in additional information that we need from different sources like the NVD library and the Tanium library as well after the sync is done. So we pull in only the things we need initially, and then we augment that data with additional information after.
Okay, because I was just wondering why you're not going to send operating system over, but if you're already pulling that from the vulnerability database, then that makes sense.
Yeah. So CVE, we do last found, we do first found, last found, and last scan date. And we do title. No, we don't do title. We go down to CVSS scores. We don't need any of this information because we're pulling it into ServiceNow already. But there are specific things that Tanium has that other sources just don't have. Things like solution links and remediation information, things like affected platform and products. This is not something you would find in ServiceNow's NVD library. Actual values like the proof of where the CVE is versus the expected state. And so these are all things that we need as a minimum set of requirements.
And I just want to call out there because I know we did a comply episode last year on the expected versus actual, and that's how you avoid those battles between teams that say, "Hey, you said you changed this, but it didn't change," because you can see what you expected to see versus what was actually set, and that helps resolve those issues.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually like the number one ask from customers has been, how do you prove this vulnerability actually is on the endpoint, right? And the expected is one thing, but the actual is where we will provide, and you're going to see the data later on in ServiceNow, where you're going to see the entire list of paths and proof points inside of the Tanium attribute in ServiceNow, which validate that, yes, you found it, it was exactly there, and this is how we found it, etc. So here's like a pre-configured job, right? Batch sizes, columns, all of these things that you're seeing here, these are things that have been pre-configured, but we need to make sure that as we configure these things and you run the job, your job will dictate what number this will ultimately end up being, because you'll need to run it at least 2 or 3 times to kind of understand if you're sending too less or too little, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll go ahead and run this. And what we're going to go to now is the ServiceNow side. We did talk about, the connect job as a configuration. Tanium still needs to provide a token and a URL. So URL is easy because that's actually our regular cloud API URL for Tanium. Or if you're on premise, you would set up a actual image server with a host name of your Tanium server itself. So it depends on if you're on prem or the cloud. But we do need a token. So before we can go ahead, we're going to go ahead and see how we're going to create a token. Now, tokens are super important to make sure you create them based off of a very limited requirement of access, right? And the way we do this is with a concept called personas in Tanium. And actually, you probably remember the whole concept around persona actually started with, making sure that there's no service account or person assigned to a token, which is more risk for the organization. So having a persona to be able to do things like an integration like ServiceNow and Tanium, it's actually great. So if we put in SNVR as a persona, and just to explain to people what a persona is, it's something that I can actually log in to service or to Tanium. I can switch to a persona with limited access and do things or generate a token, which means that my token now is limited, but it's not assigned to a user per se. It's assigned to either a group of people who can switch into a persona. It's not their permissions. It's actually the personas permissions that are generating the token. So it's a very limited least privilege option for integrations with Tanium to be able to leverage a persona. If you look at the roles that we need comply operator, we need interact basic user in Tanium, and we need ability to create a token, which is gateway user. And those are the three core roles that you're going to need to be able to function with this integration. And you'll see all the permissions here. So our persona is going to consist of three different roles: comply operator, gateway user, and interact basic user. This gives us the necessary permissions to be able to create an API token, read the comply product data like we need to, and then be able to also query for things that we need to with the gateway itself. And as we scroll down, what's really important is to make sure that your unrestricted management rights in the computer groups is selected. So that way you're able to ensure that there's no restrictions put in place with the type of computers you query. And then the persona should be usable, or I should be able to switch to this persona if I'm part of a group. And so the admins group is typically where we want to be able to control this, and only admins can switch to this persona. So let's save this. And this now, because I gave the gateway user role, I'm going to be able to now navigate to the persona directly from here. Now you do have to sign out and sign back in to be able to use a persona. If you don't sign back in, then you're gonna not see that default persona, like this button here. So now that I've signed back in, I'm gonna click my name and I'm gonna click the default persona. Now I see the ServiceNow persona. So click apply, and now you're in this limited persona of being able to only see things that those roles give you access to. One of the things you're gonna see is under the settings menu, you're gonna see the API tokens. And with this, we're going to create a new API token called SNVR. And we're going to give it an expiration of 365, persona as SNVR. And we're going to basically, if you know your data center ranges for your ServiceNow instance, you could put that in here at this point. If you don't know it and you're just testing, it's okay to use zeros. And then as you move into production, make sure you have your data center IP ranges for this token. So we'll create the token, we'll copy it somewhere, and then we're going to go back to ServiceNow to actually start setting this up. Okay, cool. So URL is URL. You will have a URL that starts with like kind of like this example. Your hostname -api.cloud.tanium.com. That's an example. Make sure the -api is there. Otherwise, if you're a cloud customer, you don't put -api, it won't work. The integration will just simply not work. And for the token, we're going to go ahead and configure that. And make sure for the token, we copy the entire string, including token dash in the beginning. A lot of people miss that step, and then it just doesn't work. So now that we've done this, we're going to go ahead and make sure we mark this complete, and make sure we mark this complete, make sure we have the right URL. So this is my test instance, perfect. And then we're going to go in. So now a lot of these settings here are not necessarily required to be set up. They come out of the box and there's a default value there. If you notice that there's any problems with scan times or any of these things that are very specific to you folks as an organization to configure specifically, then just come and change it. But for the most part, out of the box, you're going to have all of these working just fine out of the box. So go through them still and mark them complete as you go through it. The second part of the setup is activating the integrations. There are more than one, there's 3 integrations total with our product. And the first integration is what we kind of walk through today, which is bringing the vulnerability findings into ServiceNow and making sure you're aware of what's in the environment and giving you a sense of business risk around those CMDB CIs that have vulnerabilities on them. So that's the first integration, and that's the first 2 items here called Tanium VR Vulnerable Item Integration. Vulnerable Item is the integration that we just set up in the Connect job, and now we're setting up in the ServiceNow side. So if we go into the configuration menu, as an administrator, you really don't have to do much here except enable it and make sure it's on demand, not running daily or anything else, because all we need to do is turn this on. We don't need to do anything else for this integration because When we actually set up that connect job, that job is responsible for pumping data to ServiceNow and then hitting this integration. The integration will pick up that data, transform it, put it into the right tables. So all you have to do is enable it and keep it on demand versus daily. The second step here is to be able to ensure that as data is coming into ServiceNow, and this is a pretty confusing part of the product of ServiceNow overall, is how does VR work in the background anyway? So every integration that you're going to find with the VR product in ServiceNow kind of uses the same framework, right? You have a place for the data to come into, and you have a bunch of data sources that process the data for you. So all this data comes from a scanner into some location in ServiceNow. For us, it's our own Tanium tables. And then it's a staging table schema where we're now populating these tables. And then those tables, as soon as they get inserts into those tables, these data sources pick up that data. And each of these data sources are out of the box. They should be here as you install this integration. But if they're not out of the box in this list, this configuration step walks you through making sure you have the ability to edit them and then add them from the left to the right. And if you don't have them, nothing will work. So you have to make sure you have the vulnerable item integration data sources added to the list. Okay.
And those were created when we imported the solution from the store.
Yeah, they're already there as part of the installation of the actual integration from the plugins menu. So they should be there in the list, and they should already be added to this job. But just a sanity check, just go in there and make sure they're there. So that's like the step to kind of enable this integration end to end, right? I told you there's more than one integration, and there's a reason for that. Bringing data into ServiceNow is the easy part. I would say so once the integration runs on schedule in that connect job, what's going to happen is you're going to see data like this come through. Okay. And as data is coming through, they're going to be creating what we call vulnerable items, VITs. So these are individual findings for individual computers found and confirmed. And there may be processes that you have in ServiceNow. As you set up VR, you may have a remediation target, you may have an assignment group, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff that happens after the data comes in. But the main part is to get the data in the first place into ServiceNow and correlate it with other scanners, correlate it with other data, match it with existing computers in the CMDB, and then be able to quickly pivot from this to then being able to patch it, which we're going to work on next. Getting the first integration up is exactly this process, the connect job, the guided setup. That's the first step. The second step of this piece of the entire workflow is the vulnerability overall solution also includes another integration called CVE augmentation. And the third integration is CVE status. So you remember when I told you, Ashley, that we only send the things that we care about in the initial run? And there's a reason for that, right? So we send it because we are actually going to go back to Tanium after the initial run is done and query for additional information using this CV augmentation integration. You don't have to do anything about this. This is automatically configured and enabled. All you have to do is enable it. And as we enable it, we can then quickly use this additional information in the context of the CVEs that are coming in. So products, platforms, et cetera, et cetera. Come in here in the guided setup, activate it and run it daily. That's all you have to do. The daily is because this is not coming from Connect, right? This is coming from a pull mechanism going back into ServiceNow. Out of the box, that's what you're going to get. And that's how the integration will run. We do have a third integration called CVE status. Now, CVE status is slightly different. What it does is it closes vulnerabilities in ServiceNow that are open after it scans in Tanium to make sure that those are no longer open vulnerabilities. So this is actually a pretty extensive setup right now. We are trying to bring this down to a very simple setup eventually. But unfortunately, right now, there is a pretty extensive setup in Tanium to be able to utilize this integration. We'll walk you through that in just a little bit. But it's the same setup on the ServiceNow side, where you enable this integration, activate it, right? And add your data sources, just like you did with the first one. Make sure they're there and activate it and run this on demand as well. Anytime you see on demand, that means data is actually being pumped from from Tanium to ServiceNow. Anytime you see daily, that means that the integration is pulling data from Tanium. So just kind of, a couple of things there to note down. We have all three integrations set up. What do you do with this? How do you know something went wrong? How do you know that something is working? How do you know you need to fix something or ask for help? The most common thing you're going to see is that as soon as these integrations run, you're going to have what we call integration runs show up. Integration runs means that one run is a single sync from Tanium to ServiceNow and vice versa. So what happens in the situation? It's very, very straightforward. If you look at the screen, you're going to see things like 89,000 imported items. That is individual rows coming from Tanium into ServiceNow. Just because you imported 89,000 items doesn't mean that you actually processed and used or had anything to do with actual updates into ServiceNow. As you can see, there's 0 and 0. That tells me that even though I imported 89,000 items or rows from Tanium, I actually did nothing with them. So when you see new or updated, that's what you care about. This is the actual updates or inserts to ServiceNow versus what's coming in. This is my staging table data. This is my actual updates or inserts. So a run tells you all the information about the entire run end to end. When you click into the run, this is where you're going to see the data surrounding what actually happened. And the way ServiceNow structured this is at the very top, you have a run. And right underneath it, you have a bunch of processes. Process records, so meaning that it's processing 50 items at a time because we can't do 89,000 all at once. So we split it off into smaller batches. And these batches either get inserted, deleted, ignored, unchanged, and those statuses get updated. So as you see, we sent in 50 at a time. We didn't ignore them, we didn't update them, and we didn't insert them. So there's a lot of stuff here that is coming in, but not relevant. There's also some things that were relevant, but we ignored it because of certain reasons. So the way you look at this is that, okay, well, yesterday we synced this run, and in that run, I had 1,700 processes, 50 per process of those records. And out of those processes, I had some updates, I had no updates, I had new items, I had ignored items, etc. So this is how you kind of keep track from an administrative level on what's coming in. Is it matching what's going out? Is it having problems? Is it having issues, et cetera, et cetera? All of the integrations work the same. They all have the same run and process architecture in ServiceNow. It is very confusing for people who are just starting to work with this. So take your time to learn it and play with it. And here's a really, really good example of the vulnerable item integration runs that we just recently did. So as you can see, I had 114,000 vulnerabilities come in. 221 were the new ones because they're new, and updated ones were 114,000. So that means that there were some changes in the actual vulnerabilities that accounted for this. In the meantime, we also imported 97,000 computers, and 1,300 of those were brand new. This is what all of this means. If these numbers are zeros, you have a problem. You have to make sure you audit this on a regular cadence to ensure that there's no issues or discrepancies or problems processing the data, which happens a lot for large-scale customers. And that's where we decide, okay, is 4,000 at a time or 2,500 at a time the right batch size? Because if it's too much, then it's going to take too long to process. If it's too little, it's going to go too fast for Tanium to keep up or ServiceNow to keep up with. And so there's this delicate balance of really understanding what that batch size is based on what we see after the initial runs. So actually, that's a lot of info. I don't know if that's if you have other questions or anything, and I'd love to kind of stop it here and let's pivot to remediation after this.
This is setting it up to bring in the vulnerability response data. So out of this, then we're going to be driving change controls and then pushing patches. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So after this is the initial data coming in. After this, we pivot into the using this data with change control and patch remediation. Yeah.